So we're going to study the Ramban in Parshat Masai that we read just, yesterday, I think. Seems like ages ago, with the Ramban in Sefer HaMitzvos. Of course, the Rambam was Sefer HaMitzvos, but the Ramban wrote Hasagos, his comments on the Sefer HaMitzvos. So you should have 2 pages in 2 piles. You'll take one of each. And the pasuk that we're interested in, if you have a chumash, you could open the chumash, or if not, I tried to copy it on the page itself.
It's at the top.
You see that? Mm-hmm. So this is a pasuk in Perek Lamed Gimel. So Gershon's here. I'm going to ask him to open up, if he can, a chumash, if you have a chumash. Bamidbar Perek Lamed Gimel. And the psukim Nun Aleph until Nun Gimel. So 4 psukim Daber El Bnei Yisrael Aleichem. So the Torah says that God tells Moshe to speak to the people of Israel that you're going over the Yarden, you're entering into Eretz Canaan. And what does the Torah say? V'horashtem, which means that you should conquer all those who settled in the land, those who are living in the land. And then if you fast forward to Pasuk Nun Gimel, after V'horashtem es ha'aretz, it says V'yeshavtem ba. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to emphasize the relationship between V'horashtem and V'yeshavtem. Conquer the land and settle the land. And then the Torah adds a few words. Ki lachem nasati es ha'aretz l'resh soso. I have given you the land to inherit it. And therefore, V'snachaltem es ha'aretz, etc., etc. So what's going on here? Is the Torah, is God foreseeing what's going to happen? This is like a divine promise that we will conquer the land and then inherit the land. And then it makes sense to say, Ki lachem nasati es ha'aretz. Hashem is saying, well, you're going to be able to conquer the land and settle it because I gave you the land. And Rashi says that when it says V'horashtem es ha'aretz, it means conquer the land from its inhabitants, meaning chase away the inhabitants. V'az, and Rashi adds a key word here, v'az, and then v'yeshavtem ba. What does it mean? And then after you remove the local inhabitants, the 7 nations that occupied Palestine, remove them from the land, and then v'yeshavtem ba. What does it mean? Tuchal liskayem ba. Then you'll be able to maintain a permanent settlement in the land. But v'im lav, if you don't do it the way I told you to do it, you're going to leave the peoples of the land, the nations there in Israel, then lo tuchal liskayem ba. So the key word here is kiyum. Kiyum means the Torah is revealing how the people of Israel could establish a permanent settlement in Eretz Yisrael. And what do they have to do first? What's the precondition? V'horashtem. What's V'horashtem? Conquer the land. However, if this be the case, meaning if Rashi is correct, then V'horashtem, V'yeshavtem are not commandments. It's not a lashon tzivui, it's a promise for the future. And it's also an eitzah tova. This is the best way that you can get permanence in the land. The Ramban disagrees. And the Ramban says, al daiti, according to my opinion, mitzvah sehi, this is a command. So you can imagine that if I look in the Ramban in his commentary on the Torah, and he says mitzvah sehi, where else in the works of the Ramban am I going to find this?
Mm-hmm.
In the Sefer HaMitzvos, he's going to count it amongst the mitzvahs. Yitzavo Sanu, it commands us, sheyeshu ba'aretz. Now here I want to ask you a question. When the Ramban says, sheyeshu ba'aretz, and you shall settle in the land, Do we interpret you as you, each individual, or you as a community, as a collective whole? Meaning, if you count something as a mitzvah, then what does it imply?
Well,
Who's
sometimes
obligated?
there are national mitzvahs.
Correct. There are national mitzvahs. So we don't know if this mitzvah is national or it's individual.
Well, the Ramban tells us what he thinks.
Okay, but I'm just saying,
Yeah.
we're going step by step in the Ramban. So Ramban says, Ki hu nasalehem. God gave you a gift. He allotted the land for the people of Israel. Take advantage of it. I want you to conquer the land and settle therein. And then the Ramban adds a few words in order to apparently interpret Pasuk Nun Daled, Visnachaltem es haaretz. The Ramban says, V'lo yimasu b'nachlas Hashem. Very strange. The Torah here is commanding us to settle the land, but the Ramban is learning that in addition to settling the land, there's like another dimension here. V'lo yimasu. Who does that remind you of? Which group of Jews that, may have been guilty of this? What do you say, Adam?
No, it sounds like an Masai.
Oh, right, correct.
But it said it's
but who are we coming to attack, sort of? I mean, again, I'm not saying this is the Ramban, the Meraglim, yeah. Because the Pasuk accuses the Meraglim later on in Tanakh for being Mois B'nachlas Hashem. So it implies here that it's not just the physicality of living in the land and settling therein, there's also like some sort of emotional element that connects us to the land. And the opposite of a positive emotion would be the negative emotion of V'lo yimasu b'nachlas Hashem. Then the Ramban addresses himself to Theodor Herzl, I think. And Herzl was willing to take another land. Do you remember which land? Uganda, right. Not far.
Yeah.
Well, Africa's a big continent. The al yalu al daitam, don't even entertain the possibility, lo leches v'lichbosh eretz shinaro eretz ashur vizuatam, don't even entertain the possibility of conquering some other land, ulit yashev sham, and set up, a state of Israel in Uganda. No. It's amazing how the Ramban already foresaw. He says if they do that, then Yavru al Mitzvah Hashem, they'll be violating the command of God. Because God says, I've given you Eretz Canaan. This is the matana, the gift that I've given you. This is the land that's allotted for you. This is the land that you have to conquer and settle. No other land. It reminds me of the mitzvah of believing in God. Accept this God. Don't accept any other God. And after Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershon, you get married, and you're married to this woman, not to any other woman. I mean, technically, you can marry two wives according to Torah law, but for me, one is enough.
I was going to say it's recording.
Okay. I'm just kidding. My wife knows I'm joking around. Okay, now the Ramban makes reference to a sugya Ksubis, which describes the love of the various Amoraim for Eretz Yisrael and what they did to get to the land. And by the way, the Ramban is Yafa Doresh v'Yafa Makayim. What did he do?
Yeah.
He himself settled the land. It was not an easy thing at that time. I mean, comparatively today, it's like a cinch compared to what the Ramban had to go through. So, Masha Fligu Rabosenu. Hifligu means they like exaggerated. When you want to give someone a compliment, you say amazing. You say it's the greatest thing on earth. But this is how yeshiv baretz. V'shasalata, you're not allowed to leave the land, like you say, it's a negative. V'yadunu kimoredes ha'isha sheina rotza lalos im bailo le'eretz yisrael v'chein ha'ish. If one spouse refuses the other spouse's request to settle in the land, grounds for divorce. That's called a mored or moredis. And where is it? Says the Ramban, it's right here in Parshas Masai. Kan nitztavu b'mitzvah. Do you want to know where it is in the text? Where it is in the Bible? It's right here in the Bible. Ki hakosav hazeh mitzvah say. V'yachzer mitzvah azu b'mekomos rabin. And there are many times that the Torah repeats this mitzvah, and he gives you another pasuk, for example. Aval Rashi pirish for Rashi b'sod shatam v'shah oz yeshivasam ba. When will you have a yeshavtim ba? That's only if you get rid of the people of the land, tuchal eskayim ba, etc., etc. But masha pirashnu hu ikar. Ramban says my pshat is the main pshat. Let's now compare the Ramban to what he writes in the Sefer Mitzvahs. Mitzvah say Dalid. Right, the Ramban has a list of mitzvahs which the Rambam, he claims, had omitted. One of them, which is number 4 on his list, is Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. And by the way, there's a tremendous amount of literature to try to understand why the Rambam omitted the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael from Taryag. Some say, by the way, that it's so fundamental that the Rambam couldn't even count it. Like the whole Torah is built on it. Like the Bahag says about Amunah. So the Ramban says, Lidoros, wait a minute. God sent us into exile. If God sent us into exile, then we don't have to settle in the land. He wants us out of the land. We got booted out of the land. So therefore you might think that this is a mitzvah only during certain periods of Jewish history. No, says the Ramban, it's a mitzvah Lidoros. Now, getting back to what Moshe said before, who's obligated in this mitzvah? Is it a communal mitzvah that falls on the entire tzibur? Like, for example, Kiddush HaChodesh, which is, Bezna Gadol representing the tzibur. And there are many other mitzvahs which are not obligatory on you, on me, on Reuven, on Shimon, but rather on the tzibur. No, says the Ramban. Not only is an essay lidoros, and therefore it's counted in Taryag, but mischayev kol yochid mimenu. Every individual is obligated in every dar. Afilu bizman hagolos. So wait a second. I'm living out in, I don't know, let's say, the 5 towns, in America. And I got sent to Golos, so I don't have to go to live in Eretz Yisrael. No, says the Ramban. In every generation, every individual is obligated to settle in the land. Now he quotes a Sifri. Now watch what happens in this Sifri. This is fascinating. Ma'aseh Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, Rabbi Masya ben Charash, Rabbi Chananya ben Achi, Rabbi Yeshua, okay, all these Tanoim, these great Tanoim, Shoyotzim l'chutz la'aretz. They had to go to chutz la'aretz. Higiu l'flatya, they came to some opening, major kikar, so to speak. V'zachu es Eretz Yisrael. They were on the way out of Eretz Yisrael. And v'zachu, I don't think zachu means literally they remembered it. Zachu means they thought about it. They focused on it. Zakfu eseinehem. They raised their eyes. V'zolgu demosehem. And tears came flowing down. V'karu bigdeim. They ripped their garments. V'karu amikra zeh. V'yarashta v'yashavtim ba. Wait a second. Is this a proof that you have to live in Eretz Yisrael? Is this a proof that you don't have to live in Eretz Yisrael? So one of the great commentaries on the Ramban is called the Megillas Esther. He says, what's the Ramban bring a Tana? Shekasha Allah. Because these Amoraim, these Tanoim, left the land of Eretz Yisrael. But guess what? The Ramban only quotes part of the Sifri. The Sifri itself tells the story about these Tanoim. They had to leave Eretz Yisrael. And when they left Eretz Yisrael, they cried. But they came back to Eretz Yisrael. And then he quotes the famous statement in the Sifri, Yeshivas Eretz Yisrael Shkula Kinegi Kol Mitzvahs. It means you took all the mitzvahs in the Torah, 612, put them on one side of the balance, of the scale, and you put the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael on the other scale, it equals out all the other 612. Amazing Ramban. Now, I would like to suggest here a little bit of what we call a brisket tzvei dita, meaning there are 2 different aspects here. One aspect is the mitzvah itself. Now we have to define the mitzvah. The Ramban says the mitzvah is on every individual, every generation, wherever it is, goes to live in Eretz Yisrael. That's the mitzvah itself. But then the Ramban says, Hifligu Rabosenu. I think Hifligu Rabosenu means that let's put this mitzvah into a broader perspective. Let's compare it and weigh it against other mitzvahs. But that's not part of the Gufa mitzvah. You follow what I'm saying? All right. Now the Ramban is going to quote a Tosefta. The Yisrael has to go. It says in the Tosefta, on the pasuk, V'hoya Hashem li l'Elokim, God will be my Elokim. And this is something that Yaakov Avinu says on his way out. He says, Shavti b'sholom l'beis avi, I hope I'll come back to my parents' house. She'ein talmid lo v'hoya Hashem li l'Elokim. What is the Torah adding here when Yaakov says, God, I'll come back to the land and you will be my God? And I underlined a few words here in the Tosefta, which the Ramban is going to amplify and emphasize. And he says the following, that Kol Zman Shatem Beretz Canaan, as long as you're in the land, Harei Ani Lachem Leloka, I am your God as long as you're in the land. Ein Atem Beretz Canaan, Kaviyachol, Ani Lachem Leloka. I don't want to be your God. You want to leave the land? Says the Ramban in his parish on Achribos, quoting the Tosefta, and he says, Kaviyachol ein ani lachem elokim, outside of the land of Israel, I'm not your God. Says the Ramban that we have to conquer the land. And we have to conquer the land and bring God, so to speak, into the land. Meaning, when the Jewish people settle the land, God is the sovereign ruler over the land. And that's where Ani Hashem Elokim, I will be your God. Kol Zman She'eino Leo, as long as the Jewish people are on the land, then he michubeshet. It's as if we have conquered the land. So what it means, according to Ramban, is that there's a greater purpose to our permanent residence in Eretz Yisrael. It makes the land into kavush tachas Hashem. So now it's Ani Hashem Elokecha. I'm your God because you're living in the land. And I think this dimension, Moshe, might be on the tzibur. I think that he's saying that if the tzibur of Klal Yisrael decides to settle somewhere else, like the Ramban hinted at before, or if the tzibur doesn't want the land to be kavush tachas yodam, that they should have dominion over the land, then Hashem says, you know what? The people of Israel don't want the land. I'm not your God. Where am I your God? Where is the atmosphere of Eretz Yisrael suffused with divinity? That's in Eretz Yisrael.
But the Gemara quotes this. The Gemara in Kesubos quotes it as Kol Hadar B'chutzlar. Right? It sounds like it's on an individual, right? And they bring a pasuk by David. David said that Lech Avod Elohim Achirim when Shaul scared him out of it.
Right.
So
maybe there are two dimensions, but I'm saying in this particular Ramban, I get the impression that Ani Hashem Elokechem is addressing the people of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Ramban in Parshas Lech Lecha adds in his very short, abridged commentary another few important words. He says, "V'hosif ha'yisi lachem le'elokim," meaning if we observe the bris that HaKadosh Baruch Hu established a covenant with the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, then I will be your God. Shehu b'chvodo yanhig osam. Right? You remember we discussed that all the other nations are controlled by different sarim and different stars, kochavim. Every nation has its own sar lamala, but not so with regard to the land of Israel and the people of Israel. So what does it mean? V'yisi lachem elokim b'chvodo yanhig osam. Do you remember, Abosai, a phrase describing Eretz Yisrael? We'll see it later on. Palterin shel melech. Did you ever hear that?
Yeah.
It means that Eretz Yisrael is the palace of God. Like that's his palace on the face of the earth. So we want to get close to the Melech, to God. We want him to be our Elokim, and he should be Manigosanu. He should have a direct providence and control over the people of Israel. No intermediaries. It's all direct. And how is that going to happen? That's going to happen, says the Ramban, because we want to live close to the Palter and Shalmelech. Now, by the way, is it a good thing? Do you want a front seat in the palace of the king? You do.
Sure.
Can you think of a drawback, like a negative?
You'd be in the spotlight.
And therefore what?
Right?
If you take a step in the wrong direction, you're in deep trouble. You're in the palace of the king, my friend. If you're a couple of miles away, certainly hundreds of miles, then okay, so you violated the will of the king. Terrible. But imagine, so the Ramban in his famous Drush for Rosh Hashanah, which supposedly he gave in Akko after he settled in Israel, he says, Nivtza, on the one hand, it's a great thing that we're close to Hashem, we're in the palace of Hashem, Krovan Shal Yisrael Eitzel Kadosh Baruch Hu, but who agorim lehem richuk, v'golus, v'chalonesh. There's a downside to it, because if we don't behave ourselves properly in the land of Israel, and I don't want to say anything, that might sound chas v'sholem negative, then that's a gorim of richuk. God says, you're in the palter and shalmelch, and this is how you misbehave. This is how you're not obedient, disobedient. I'm going to send you to Golus and all punish. We merited being, permanently established in the land. It's like Roy Pnei Melech. Remember that there were certain officers that got to see the king, the top-notch officers. If we'll be very careful about observing the honor and the glory of God, then Tovlehem, Vashrehem, we'll be very fortunate. But however, the downside is, in Mamrim, if we rebel against God, Ein Lecha Merit Gol Mizeh. Oilehem Yosem Mikol Adam Shem Osim Malachem Amelch Befaltin Shel Melech Umachisin Oso Befano. Can you imagine you come up to the king and you give him a frask, That's terrible. And therefore, it comes out the following, that if we want that close connection to Shekhinah, it's got to be here. But we have to realize that the land itself, because it's so suffused with the atmosphere of divinity, it doesn't tolerate rebellion. So we have to be very careful here in the land. The Ramban goes on, just another piece from the same source in his Sefer Mitzvahs, and he says, Omrani, I would claim, ki ha-mitzvah shachacham mafligim ba, chachamim exaggerate, so to speak, about it. I don't think the word exaggerate is actually a good choice of words, but they praise, tremendous praise heaped on Eretz Yisrael, ad sha'omru, till they say, kol yotzim mimenu vidar b'chutz la'aretz. Wow, somebody leaves the land. I just want to tell you a story. I got a call just about 2 weeks ago from a close friend of mine, and he lives up in the Galil, and they took a trip. They went, I think it was to South Africa, if I'm not mistaken, but he writes to me that his son is very upset. How can we leave the land of Israel? And I think of this Ramban. The Ramban says, "Hayotzi mimenu," if you leave the land of Israel, but maybe the Ramban means on a permanent basis, I don't know, because he says "V'dar b'chutz la'aretz," right? He sets up his residence in chutz la'aretz. Yeah, beinecha koved avodah zarah. Why? Because he's leaving. He's checking out of the Nachlas Hashem. That's like avodah zarah. And then he quotes the pasuk you said before by David. And all this, says Ramban, is part of this great mitzvah say, Shenitztavinu l'reshes esaretz, to conquer the land, v'lasheves bo. Then the Ramban goes on, and again in the same presentation, and he says, Nitztavenu l'reshes ha'aretz, asher nosan ha'kodesh baruch hu v'yishalu l'avoseinu l'avram Yitzchak Yaakov lo nazvenu b'yad zulaseinu min ha'umos. Don't let the land be conquered by any one of the nations. Oh, this is very important. If you can underline this, lishmama. What do you think the Ramban means by that when he adds those two words? Oh, lishmama.
Great.
And not have anyone live there.
Correct. Desolation. Meaning, you got the land of Israel. Here are the borders. The boundaries are specified in Parshat Masai. We're going to soon see him on the next page, the Kafta V'Ferach, who wrote an entire work dedicated to the mitzvahs of Eretz Yisrael and to the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. And if you're within the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, then this is the place that was designated to the Avos, and God enters into a bris, a covenant with the Avos that he will give them the land. But every single part of the land has to be settled. So let me ask you a question. Supposing all of Klal Yisrael would come on Aliyah, but they would settle only in part of the north, not all the way up in the north, part of the south, but not all the way down south. Would they have fulfilled the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael? Because the Ramban says that we're not allowed to let any parcel of land lishmama, desolate, without settlement. But again, as far as you and I are concerned as individuals, here's the difference between the Yochid and the Tzibur. So I fulfilled my mitzvah. I settled in Ramat Beit Shemesh. I settled in Har Nof, wherever I settled. So I fulfilled my personal obligation. But on a communal level, we are obligated to see that the entire land is conquered. We don't leave any land under the dominion, the sovereignty of any other nation. And not only that, we have to settle the entire land. So from a tzibur perspective, if we leave part of the land unsettled, the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael has not been fulfilled.
If you go to the Negev and there's no water for you or your animals, you don't have a choice. You can't settle there.
Okay, so maybe there's onus Rahman Patre, but that's what he's saying. Who Amro, right? And he says, Orashtem es haaretz, the pasuk yishavtem ba, ki lachem nasati es haaretz l'resh. Now I want to come back to, before we get to the Kafta V'Ferach, to our question from before. The Ramban says, that's the second paragraph on your page, V'lo yimasu b'nachlas Hashem. You see where I underlined it? I think the Ramban is telling us something important here. Eretz Yisrael is Nachlas Hashem. This is where the Shekhinah is Shoreh, where it's the presence of God is here. And now you're going to leave the land? Basically, I think that Eretz Yisrael, from the Ramban's perspective, is the key to all of our observance. Why? Because what's the purpose of observing Hashem's mitzvos? To get closer to Hashem. Where can we get closer to Hashem? In Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because Eretz Yisrael is where Hashem is. That's where his paltin is. That's where his palace is. That's where the Melech is. So in a certain sense, Eretz Yisrael is shkula keneged kol mitzvahs. That's not an exaggeration. Because if the entire body, the corpus of mitzvahs, has one single purpose, to get us closer to Hashem, if Eretz Yisrael is the location on the face of the earth where we can get close to Hashem, then in effect, Eretz Yisrael represents all the mitzvahs of Hashem. It's the ultimate goal. It's shkula keneged kol mitzvahs. Last week, you may recall, we discussed Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is plotting to go into the land of Israel. He begs Hashem. 515 prayers. I don't know how many prayers. So Hashem says, go up on top. You'll see the land from on top. But I'll consider it as if you did all the mitzvah tzlius baretz. Meaning Moshe Rabbeinu was a unique exception to the rule. I don't think we got to emphasize this last week. He was on a level in which his entire being was identified with Hashem, with the Shechina. He was the ultimate personification of Peh HaMedavrim HaShechina. And the Rambam, in his Pirush HaMishnayos and Chelik, he says very beautifully how Moshe Rabbeinu was always prepared to receive the word of Hashem. There wasn't a moment that he was excluded. And Moshe Rabbeinu is called Ish Elokim. Right. It makes sense, therefore, that Moshe Rabbeinu, from his perspective, wants Eretz Yisrael more than anything else. This can be the culmination of his closeness to Hashem, of his being an Ish Elokim. Hashem says, you know what? Moshe, you reached on an unbelievable level. You achieved more than anyone else. Go up to the mountain and look. Now, you may remember that the Ramban, at the beginning of the Torah in Bereshis, asks, what is Vayar, 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 Vayar Shem Kitov? Oh, Vayar, says the Ramban, is not just a physical re'iyah, that Hashem, saw, that the light is good. No. It means much more than that. Vayar indicates a connection, a deep connection, a profound existential connection. So Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, go up on the mountain, see the land, and that gives you a hochacha, a proof that you have this existential connection to the land. Okay, now you have the Kafta V'Ferach, correct? That's on the second side. Is there an extra sheet? I'll take it. Oh, thanks. So what I was able to copy for you here on the bottom is a little bit of a background about who the Kafta V'Ferach was. His name was Farchi. If you've ever heard of any Jews from Aram Tzova, the Syrian Jews from Syria, the name Farchi is quite common. I mean, not so common, but so therefore, he called his sefer Kafta V'Ferach because his name was Farchi. Now, people think that if you would ask the average yeshiva about when was the Kafta V'Ferach alive, he'll tell you maybe 400 years ago. If he's brilliant, he'll say 500 years ago. He was alive in 1280. He's a Rishon. And he decided that he's in love with one mitzvah in the Torah, and that's the mitzvah of Eretz Yisrael. So he dedicates his life to the study of the mitzvahs hatluyos ba'aretz. And it becomes like a first source, a primary source to understand the mitzvahs hatluyos ba'aretz Yisrael. Now let me give you a sort of an overview or like a synopsis of what the Kafta V'Ferach is trying to say here. The Kafta V'Ferach says, with regard to Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, that there are two different dimensions. There's the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael that generates the mitzvahs hatluyos ba'aretz, trumas, maasros, leket, shikha, peah, etc. But that kiddush, that sanctification of the land for the mitzvahs, is contingent upon the Jewish people living in the land. But says the Kafta V'Ferach that there's another dimension of the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael that's not dependent upon the Jews living in Eretz Yisrael. And that sort of is, he says, is klali, it's general, And it comes from the Avtacha, the promise that Hashem gave to Avraham Avinu to give us the land. And it doesn't depend upon whether we conquered the land.
Yes.
Now, wait a second. What's unique about the mitzvahs hatluyos ba'aretz? They are chovas karka, and they are generated by the kibush. Now the Kafir is saying something unbelievable. There's no kibush, and yet the mitzvahs still, and the kedusha still applies. So I think what he's saying is that forget about the limited mitzvahs hatluyos ba'aretz, the agricultural mitzvahs. In addition to that, Eretz Yisrael has a relationship to all the mitzvahs. Every single one of them. Because as we said before, what's the purpose of all the mitzvahs? To get closer to Hashem. And how do we get close to Hashem? Through Eretz Yisrael. Because Eretz Yisrael, says the Ramban, Shkula Keneged Kol HaMitzvahs, that's the place where the Shekhinah resides. So we can get closest to God, to the Shekhinah, in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, says the Kafta V'Ferach, it makes sense now that even in a moment of time in history that we're not living in the land still remains sanctified. Albeit not for the mitzvahs of Trumas and Maasros, because the golus is mafkia, it undermines and uproots that kibush that generated the kedusha. But there's a kedusha that's above and beyond kibush. I would call it essential, inherent in the land, because the land is the land where Hashem is mashra. Okay, there's a lot more to cover here in this Kafta Ferret, but I think it's time. Yeah. So we'll end here. Good. Thank you so much. Okay. You're able to hear. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yishkoach. Thank you very much.
Mhm.